Okay, let's begin. Well, welcome to the second free Friday Centre for Welfare Reform webinar, supported by Citizen Network. So I'm Simon Duffy. I'm the director of the Centre for Welfare Reform, and I'm going to try and host this session, which I think is going to be very, very easy because we're safely in the hands of Liz and Sarah, who are very good at this stuff and know what they're doing. Just a reminder, we're recording this and we will make the webinar recording available afterwards, and you should be able to, we should be able to send you an email with some links in. And very importantly, there's a paper exploring some of the things Liz and Sarah that will be sharing with us, which the Centre will publish in 2 or 3 weeks' time. If you've not done so already, I'd really recommend that you subscribe to the Centre for Welfare Reform's newsletter. I'll put the link to that in the chat function later on. You can also join Citizen Network for free. And yeah, I think that's about it from me. So again, if you're not familiar with this, there's a button that says chat on your screen. If you click that button, it opens up a section in which you can write things. Liz and Sarah are going to talk for maybe about 40 minutes between them, and then we'll have some time to ask questions. Given that there's quite a lot of people, and it makes it much easier if you write any questions you have as the talk is going on in the chat bar, and then Liz, Sarah and I can help work out how they can respond to some of those questions in the last 20 minutes. Have I forgotten anything? I don't think so. Okay. Well, I've known Sarah a little less than I've known Liz. Sarah Holmes is a really great practitioner who's done all sorts of interesting things and has worked a lot around individual service funds, and a little while ago joined Liz at Imagineer. I've known Liz. Liz looks so youthful and young, it's hard to believe that we've known each other as long as we have done, but for over 10 years. And Liz has been a long-term fellow of the Centre for Welfare Reform, but also run this really exciting project called Imagineer, which is there's so many things going on under the hood of Imagineer that I won't try and do justice to it, but it combining rock and roll and individual service funds and a whole lot more. So it's a damn good organisation, firmly rooted in the community, and a place in which lots of good things have been happening for a long time. And some of those experiences, I'm sure, inform Liz and Sarah's thinking. So I'm going to hand over first to Liz. I think you can unmute yourself, Liz. Any problem?
I can. There. Done. Thank you, Simon. Thanks for the introduction. I'll just make sure that we've got the slides available as well. If I share screen there, is that working?
Yeah.
Can people see that okay?
Yeah.
That's fine, is it? So I will move back to the beginning. We'll start at the beginning. So thanks for the introduction, Simon. That's wonderful. And welcome to everyone who's joined us today for the webinar as well. So we'll be spending an hour together looking at the topic of exploring the strength in community. So as Simon's already described, myself and Sarah's written a paper on this topic. The paper is a discussion paper. What we're wanting to really do through producing the paper is to encourage people to start thinking about how we not only recognise the strength in community, but start to harness that for the future kind of communications and relationships that happen within community settings. And what we've really recognised since the start of the pandemic is how communities have really come together. People within communities have been there for each other, maybe much more than has been the case in the past. And the pandemic is, in a sense, within the crisis of the pandemic, we've found communities functioning in such a way that a lot of us have aspired to for a long time, but found it really difficult to work out a way of how to do it. And this has forced us into a situation where we're starting to see relational capital happen amongst the people that are within our communities. So we're going to explore that a little bit today. And what we really want to do is look at how we harness that through this stage of recovery, but also into the stage of renewal post-pandemic. When we think about community, we think about community in a really dynamic way. So we're thinking about it in a multi-layered way. We recognise that community captures people who have a shared interest. People might form a community on the basis of a cultural relationship. It might be on the basis of faith. And community can simply be down to the geographical area that we find ourselves living in. So we want to really explore community on all them levels, but also recognise that sometimes communities are enduring and sometimes communities are short term. So we're seeing it on all them different levels. But we realise that if we want to harness this, we really need to start to recognise what needs to change, because there's certain elements of how community functions right now that means that we need to embed some change to harness the strength. And it might be that we need to see change on a policy level. We might need to see change on the systems and structures that organise society. Or we might actually need to see something much more radical than that, because for a lot of the people here, we know that for decades we've tried to shift systems and we've tried to shift structures to enable citizens and communities to have strength. And quite often it's not resulted in the outcomes that we're looking for. So we might need something much more radical. But we're going to be setting the context in these next slides. And what we'd like to do is have the discussion at the end. We recognise the keys to citizenship in this slide here as being key factors within how communities function and relate. But what we really want to work towards is moving away from people being systematically excluded to working towards something that enables common good within society. So we hope you enjoyed the webinar. We're looking forward to the discussion at the end. And now I'm going to pass on to Sarah, who's going to talk through the next slide.
I've unmuted myself, so hopefully people can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up, Liz, if you can hear me? That's great. Okay, lovely. I can only see Liz's face. I can't see anybody else at the moment, so that's fine. So welcome to our first slide. So what we wanted to do first of all really is to set the picture for now, what's happening now in our society. So all the way through our talk, we use visuals, and this is something we do at Imagineer with everything that we do. We love to think visually, we love to plan visually, and we love to explain things visually as well. So we hope that this will be nice and accessible for people, and what we'll do through each slide is we will talk through the images that you can see in front of you on your screen to help to illustrate what we're talking about. So the picture for now really starts with where power sits in our society and where the money sits. So you'll see at the top of your screen there's a little icon of what should be the Houses of Parliament, and you'll see Big Ben there with the little clock face. And we've got a pound sign which symbolises the money which all comes in to central government, which is collected through a variety of ways, through our taxes that we pay as citizens, and through corporation tax that's paid by businesses, and through national insurance contributions, etc. And really the way that things are organised at the moment, and this is a very simple way to explain it, but hopefully it helps people to understand how we could do things differently by explaining the current context. So from the Houses of Parliament on your picture, you will see 3 arrows pointing down, and then we've got 3 little bubbles in pink, which represent how the government really shares out that central pot of money that it's collected. And these tend to fall into, today we're talking mostly in the health and social care context, but we also recognise it's a much bigger picture than that for society. So we're just giving you some clear examples from the health and social care context here. So the money is divided up into pots. So health, or NHS if you prefer to think of it that way, local authority, which is local councils up and down the country who are responsible for looking after a geographic area, and for specific projects, which is innovations and new ways of doing things quite often. And from those pink pots of money, it's drilled down even further into something that we will refer to as silos, and the silos like a little pot that has got sides on it. They're on farms, they collect sewage, but effectively it's like a pit, if you like. And these silos have labels attached to them. So quite often in the local authority or in the health context particularly, the pots of money sit next to a label, and people are given labels based on their needs, their health circumstances, and whether or not they've got a disability. So we've put some, again, examples. It's not the whole picture, but this is just to help illustrate and keep it quite simple. So some of those labels, examples, could be older people, people with learning disabilities, people with mental health diagnosis, and people with physical disabilities. And the problem with this is quite often, if you are somebody who requires support funded by the government, you will often get a service or support delivered under your label, which means your choice is restricted. The service or the support that's on offer is often alongside other people who have the same label as you. And that might not be what you would choose. That might not be the type of support you want. It might not be a service that you want to join in with. So this is a very siloed way of managing need at the moment in the system that we've got. What we want to talk to you about today is how we could have a vision for a different picture and start to think about how things could be done differently. So it could be quite a challenging discussion. We hope it will be. We hope that it will provoke discussion as we go along. Please put your comments in the feed as we talk through this. Over to Liz.
Can you hear me? Yes, that's worked, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Sarah's just explained the system as it stands right now. So that's a system of which people who are accessing social care, accessing support, that's what quite often they are sat within. They may not experience it, they may not have the perspective of it all, but that's what they're sat within. And really what we're seeing here, you'll see with this slide here, it says social care machine, and that sounds quite crude. You know, it sounds quite crude to actually refer to social care as a machine. But for a lot of people that we've worked alongside and a lot of families, they do feel as though they've been on a conveyor belt when they've been through the social care system. And when we think about the very resource that's there to support people within society that have reached a stage in their life where they're wanting support with a certain element, the biggest resource we have is a social care system we currently have in place. When we look at it from a financial perspective, what we're recognising is that communities have a lot of resource when it comes to love, sharing, being there for each other, but financially a lot of the resource comes through the social care system. So what myself and Sarah wanted to start exploring a little bit is, what is that and how is it used? So let's first look at what actually goes in from a resource perspective. We have money that comes in from central government, as Sarah's just explained, through that silo system. For people that have been involved in social care for a long time, you will recognise the fact that if central government sets up a new way of working and wants things to change, wants the systems and structures to change, quite often grants are made available to help to fund that transition from old to new. Recently we've had the Transforming Care Fund as one example. And in 2015, there was a change to the budget that meant local councils could take the option to add a precept, where 2% of the money generated through council tax could be utilised to help fund the social care system. So we've got them different avenues of money coming into to the social care system. And we know that there's been austerity, but when you look at the figures of austerity, actually going back to the start of austerity 10 years ago to now, in real terms, the financial difference of the money going into the social care system, it's only actually in effect 2% less than it was 10 years ago. But in saying that, we have a much higher demand of people trying to access social care, requiring social care, asking for assessments, but a significant decline in people actually receiving the support. So in some way, the social care system at this current time is preventing people getting into the support that they actually require. And when you look at austerity and where the cuts were made, most significant cuts were made in wages for social workers, wages for frontline workers through home care, and the money utilised to fund care homes. But then we need to really look at how this is utilised. And based on the social care system that we have at this moment in time, we've got to recognise that some of that resource that's actually aligned to support citizens is utilised to cover quite expensive administration. It can go towards the covering of core costs. It can go to covering legal costs. We know in a lot of instances, local authorities do find themselves in situations where they're being legally challenged. And that there is a cost to that. There's a cost to the legal process. There's a cost to creating legal protection. And then there's also the cost for having to pay out when a local authority has been found as acting unfairly towards one of the citizens of their area. And then we have the cost of systems. The amount of times I've worked alongside a social worker or somebody who works within a local authority, and they find themselves having to use IT systems to capture information about the individuals, the people they're working with. And them systems cost a fortune themselves, quite often are ineffective, and take up a massive amount of time from the people that are there to be working alongside individuals, to be working alongside people. And not only is it an expensive system, not only is it taking up the cost of that social worker's time, but it's exhausting that social worker of any inspiration and motivation they have of being able to make a difference. And that's how we see the current use of resources that's there for social care. But I'll pass on to Sarah now. Over to you.
Okay, I'm back. Can everyone hear me? Thumbs up, Liz? Excellent. Brilliant. So what we want to do now is propose a vision for a different picture. So if you remember back to our first slide where we had the government buildings at the top, you'll see on this slide we've got the same building. So we've still got central government where the money is coming in centrally. But what's happening in this slide is a much different picture, and we like to sort of align this with the citizenship model, which Simon developed, and you can find on the Centre for Welfare Reform website if you want to read more about it and you haven't heard about it before. But the citizenship model is based on an equal starting point for all citizens. And it's based on the citizen being in the centre of decision making and taking the lead. It's based on the devolution of power to local communities and to people in communities to make those decisions, because they're the people who know what makes best sense for them. So you'll see in this picture, I'm going to unpick the image a little bit just so that it makes sense for you. So you'll see there's an arrow coming down from the Houses of Parliament. And then underneath that, we've got a picture of a little community with a house, some trees, some businesses, and we've got some citizens on there as well. So the citizens are very purposely in the centre of this image, which is the same as the citizenship model, which you would see if you were reading about that. So the idea here is actually what we're looking at is money being drawn down in the same way from central government, but it being shared with communities, and that people who have need for support We'll be able to draw down individualised funding in a way that makes sense for them. We already have a range of models of this available, but it's not well established. It's patchy, it's inconsistent from area to area. So if we talk about things like direct payments, personal budgets, individual service funds and personal health budgets, and also joint funds where you've got health and social care funding in a pot of money together. What we're thinking about here is these pots of money drawn down from central government could be used in a much more efficient way because it goes straight to the individual, and the individual is in the driving seat of deciding how that money is spent in a way that makes sense for them so that their needs can be met and so that they're able to live as a citizen in the community they choose to be part of, surrounded by their family and their friends and people who are important to them. And so you'll see from the centre of this image, we've got arrows moving outwards, and these really are the elements of a citizenship-led approach. So we've got resources and assets that sit within communities. If we think about individuals within communities, everybody has relationships and connections with friends, family, neighbours, people they know from what we would call bumping spaces, so places where lots of people congregate together. You will often see the same people in those bumping spaces. It might be a local supermarket, it could be the library, it could be a place of worship. So we've got lots of real rich resource in the form of relationships and connections there. But we've also got other assets as well. People own property, people have personal income, personal wealth, and people have shared property and shared wealth as well. And then we've got professionals still in this model, but the professionals sit on the edge of the model. So these are people who would typically be commissioned in to provide an element of somebody's support pathway or care pathway, depending on their needs. So people like social workers and physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, and the list goes on. I'm sure you understand what I mean. But instead of these professionals being prescribed and gifted to the person as the service or therapeutic intervention they must receive, the person with their individualised funding is able to commission in the support that they need. And so the professionals are not driving that process, they're sitting on the edges as something that can be drawn in as part of the support model. So it's a very different balance of power here that we're talking about. The concept of ideas is a very powerful concept in this model. So we spend a lot of time talking to people about what's important to them. We spend a lot of time listening and understanding why people want their lives to be a certain way, and what are the things that make sense for them and what are the things that are missing. And we explore with people and groups of people as communities what works in terms of their ideas for a better life and a better society. And then we think about things like equipment as well as part of that picture. So we're thinking about things like assistive technology, potentially mobility aids or adaptations to property and things like that, which help people to build the life that they want to live in the community where they want to be. Over to Liz.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. I'll just try and move the slide on. Aha, there we go. There we go. Okay. So far in the presentation, we've talked about where we are now, and we've talked about an idea that we're proposing with regards to a societal structure that could work for the future. But we're really aware of the fact that ideas, innovations about changing social care have been around for a long time. Go back to the Valuing People paper, Valuing People Now, the innovations around strength-based approaches like local area coordination, asset-based community development. There's been a lot of motivation to look at doing things in different ways and engaging with people in a way that makes sense to them. But we've always had this tension. We've always had something that's holding us back from making that change in a general way for a good breadth of society. We tend to see that there's pockets of innovation happening, but what about everyone? And this image represents what we're putting forward as being the main cause of tension. If we think about that resource that we talked about 2 slides ago, the very structure that holds that resource quite often gatekeeps that resource. And I'm not going to go into the detail of each one of these, but fear, the legal structures and legal literacy, crisis management, and constantly being in a perpetual situation of crisis management, and the use of austerity as a reason why people should not receive the support in the way that makes sense to them, quite often is what holds us back. But what we've seen in the last 3 months of the pandemic is not only an increase in communities actually being there for each other and finding their own strength and making a difference in each other's lives, but we've seen a whole wealth of people interested, getting involved in conversations around how can we harness this? How can we make this more possible for more people? There's a real sense of relational capital. We've realised that we have got resourcefulness. It's there, it exists. We've got the innovations, we just need the opportunity to make them happen. And crikey, are we motivated at the moment? You know, the way that people have been relating to each other in making a real difference. We think that now is the right time for the tipping point of that tension and to move much more closely to things being based and managed within a community setting. We just need to work out how. Back to you, Sarah.
Oh no, it's you again, Liz.
It's not back to me. Sorry, we've rehearsed this so well. So what we just want to bring in here as well is our experience of independent support brokerage as one of the vehicles for that change. Just a brief description of what independent support brokerage is, because we know that there's a lot of misunderstanding around support brokerage. We know from the fact that support brokerage has been commissioned in a very restrictive, limited manner that people have a wrong impression of what support brokerage is. And also the term brokerage is still used in local authorities more as an allocation system rather than a true support brokerage function. So support brokerage, as it's evolved, has actually embedded a lot of the strength-based approaches that we see around. So within support brokerage practice, we really build in that element of asset-based community development. Person-centred planning is one of the first starting points of support brokerage, but then also how local area coordination functions and all the abilities around personalised funding. So here, we've got it all in a fuel pump. The broker is the purple person in the vehicle. The broker fills up the fuel for the journey, but it's a person that is ultimately in the driving seat. They are in charge of their own journey. And as a broker, we may be able to provide guidance, we might be able to help them map out that journey, where they want to be, where they want to end up, how they're going to get there. But ultimately, they are in charge of that journey. We might help to create a sense of direction. But at any point, that person can ask us to get out of the vehicle because they're ready to do this on their own, or they're ready to do this with somebody else. And they might ask us to get back into the vehicle at any point. It is not a set role. It's a whole range of different functions that we can bring in to help make a difference. Now it's over to you.
Okay, just checking you can hear me okay. Liz, thumbs up. Excellent. So we're on quite a busy slide here, and it looks quite visually cluttered, so I'm going to talk you through it so that it makes sense. So when we look at an individual within their community setting, we start with the person, and we are all equally human. Some of us have more advantage than others, but we all start off as human beings with the same basic needs. And to illustrate that, we've got our man in the centre of the picture in yellow, and he's surrounded by a pink triangle. And those of you who've studied sociology, psychology, health and social care type courses will have come across Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we're using Maslow's hierarchy of needs here to illustrate that we are all humans with the same basic needs. So those are things like safety, love, belonging, self-esteem, etc. And then surrounding the person in the centre of the image with their basic needs, we think about the keys to citizenship. This is another model which Simon developed, and you can also find the keys to citizenship on the Centre for Welfare Reform Library as well. And the 7 keys to citizenship are listed there as green icons around the image. So we've got purpose, life, home, money, help, freedom and love. And all of those things are what we see as being the keys to being a citizen. And again, if you haven't explored this model in practical application before, it'd be really good to read up on it on the website and see some of the things that have been done as a result of developing that model. But we recognise that those are the keys, and that's where we should be for people to be citizens. But what we also recognise is that often that doesn't work on its own for people. So what we need are some support structures around that. So you'll see that we've illustrated this with scaffolding, which is the blue crisscross imaging around the image. And the scaffolding really represents what we see as strength bringing approaches and structures, support structures that can be put around an individual or around a community to help them become strong and stay strong. So we've listed across some of the piping on the scaffolding there, some of the strength-based approaches that people will be familiar with. So things like advocacy, information, advice and guidance. That might be through something like Citizens Advice Bureau, for example, or it could be through another professional who's got an IAG qualification. We've got independent support brokerage listed there, but we've also got things like neighbourhood groups and community circles, places where people have opportunity to learn and to share and to exchange their gifts and their assets and their resources. And these are what we see as the support structures, which are working well, particularly at the moment through the pandemic that we're experiencing. We're seeing a lot of these approaches really coming to life in neighbourhoods and in communities to help people to be connected and to help people stay strong and resilient. We know that some people have not been getting the same support that they were receiving prior to the pandemic starting, and that's for a range of reasons. Sometimes it's because services have paused due to the social distancing regulations. In some cases it's because services are not operating due to furlough, and in some cases it's because the local government funding priorities have changed, and the local authority may have adopted the Care Act easements, which means that they've changed their priorities about what they're funding at the moment. So with all of this, what we're trying to think about is the things which are helping people and communities to become strong and to stay strong. And what we really want you to be thinking about as you come away from this webinar today is what's working well for you as an individual during the COVID pandemic. What's working well in your community? What examples have you seen of community strength being displayed? And what things do you think we need to be doing to help our society to become stronger? So I'm just going to skip on to the next slide now, Liz, if you could. Thank you. I really love this image. It's my favourite image out of the presentation and also in the paper that we've developed. And this really sums up where we see the strength of community coming from. And it's this concept of what we call one anothering. There's a posh term for it. You may have heard it before, relational reciprocity. And that really means that we do things as equal citizens for one another. So we share, we swap, we give, we receive. And these relationships are built on relational capital. So it's based on time we spend with people and invest with people, getting to know our neighbours, building trust, knowing that people are safe people to go to when you need help. So over time, trust is built and relational capital is created. And this is the capital, this is the currency we think is going to make our society strong as we move out of the COVID pandemic. So we just wanted to finish off with this image. We want to leave you with an image in your mind, really, as we move into a challenge now and a discussion about how can we help to continue making communities stronger. So I'm going to pass over to Liz and she's going to bring a challenge to you now.
Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, so myself and Sarah's put the paper together. We've wanted to do this webinar to really start the discussion on how we can achieve what we've proposed here. We're not suggesting that we have the answers. We definitely have the experience. We know, we've seen people in different situations, different circumstances, and we know what's made a difference. But the challenge is, how do we do this? How do we do this? So how do we do this? Firstly, from the perspective of a citizen and for the individual. How is this done within neighbourhoods? How can it be harnessed within neighbourhoods? What do we need to think about there? What can people within neighbourhoods do to harness that? But then the bigger picture is, and probably the most challenging actually out of the three, is as a society. Because when we look at this from a society point of view, there's systems and structures that may be archaic, may be quite difficult to shift and change. But is there a way that we can do that? And it's over to you. So we'd really like to open it up for discussion and just see what people think about that.
So thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent, provocative exploration of the kind of values and the issues and the problems. There's loads of things in the chat function already that people have said. The odd one's a kind of question, but I'm going to see if anybody actually wants to ask a question of you or just make a statement, really. There was one thing I saw that I think was asking for a bit of question of clarification from Mark, who was asking about the difference between circles of support and community circles in one of your drawings. So do you just want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Shall I pick that one up, Sarah? Yeah, okay. So a circle of support, there's similarity, I have to say, but a circle of support is usually has a focus on a person. So it's a person who develops a circle of support around that individual. And people are invited with a very specific focus of being there for that person. And that might be to listen to what's happening in their life. It might be to bring in fresh ideas, different perspectives. It might be to offer practical support or help them to become connected in a wider network of people. So that's a circle of support, and it is very much designed around what makes sense for the person, where they meet, how often they meet. And yeah, we're involved in some circles of support. There's one that's full steam ahead because the guy is absolutely a genius on steam engines. And so that's a circle of support. A community circle is a collective of people that come together for a mutuality of support. They're there for one another, they listen to what's going on for one another, and they offer support to one another when they listen to what's going well, but also what issues somebody might have at that particular time. So it's like, yeah, everyone has an equal place within a circle of a community circle. But interestingly, what I have observed within circles of support is that when that community of people get to know each other, quite often they naturally become a community circle. They do start being there for each other, even though they very first got together with the focus on one individual. So I have seen a circle of support morph into a community circle eventually. Yeah. So
community circles a bit like, I might use like a word like peer support, people coming together to support each other. Is that right? Yeah, that's the kind of thing. And outside the community circle, people may not have any other way of relating to each other. They might not know each other in the local area. They might not have a shared interest, but they do come together with that set purpose of being a community for one another. And we've got, so Karen would like to ask a question. Karen, you need to just unmute yourself, that's it, and ask away.
Hiya. So in my experience of work, I've worked for Cloverleaf Advocacy for nearly 15 years and work specifically with people with learning disabilities. Since the pandemic, people have used the let's do things for people, not with people, a lot more. So we've seen quite a lot where support provision has been reduced and it's not been done in consultation or had any discussions at all with the person themselves. So it's just, you know, we're going to reduce this package of support without any discussion. Certainly person-centred planning, I've not been involved in anything like that for a number of years. And we've been doing a little bit of planning with people just because they found the situation initially really difficult, and trying to give a little bit of structure or some ideas on, you know, how to maintain their own, you know, mental well-being, etc. So I think there's been a number of things, but yeah, certainly done for people rather than with people. And I think that's really been reinforced. And I don't want to carry on down the line that this becomes the new normal and we go back another 20 years. It's quite a scary prospect, to be honest.
Mm.
One of you like to respond to that fear, really?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's experiences during the pandemic has been unique and different. You know, everybody's been through a really different experience, a different story behind it. What we're proposing here is how we harness the good. And from what you're explaining there, Karen, that does not fit into that mould that I would see as being good. You know, doing for is certainly not the way forward. But actually being collective and equal is actually the way forward. I think one of my biggest concerns is how people we're still running a system where people have to justify why they need support through that system at the very start point. And for me, that's not something that fits with what would be a good society.
But there has been some good that's come out of this, because one gentleman always had his meals done for him, and he was told, you know, he couldn't be involved in that process. And since, and then obviously pandemic, so people were just, the support provider were just getting him ready-made meals, which he didn't want. He wanted to be able to learn to cook himself. So we did that remotely, myself and another volunteer, every weekend for about 5 sessions, and now he cooks independently. And now he says, I'm not going to have support to do that bit for me. I don't need it. All I need is somebody just to have a bit of patience and teach me the skills and just help me. And then I can fly myself. I can go off and do it myself. And that's been fantastic to see. And I don't think we would have had that opportunity if it hadn't have been for the pandemic, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's also recognising, isn't it, that we won't hear a lot of the stories for quite some time. You know, we're understanding what's happened for some people because they have a voice and they have connections, but there'll be some people within our society that we've not heard their story yet, and we don't know what it's been like for them.
No.
So,
I'd just like to jump in on the back of that, really, just to talk about a lot of the issue we find often is people don't have an awareness of what their rights are. They don't have an awareness of what to ask for or how to describe it. And they often don't know that they're able to have somebody working in an advocacy role alongside them. Quite often the statutory advocacy function is for change management. It's when a specific change is happening in a person's life. But often people need an advocate to be with them for more day-to-day type decision and planning processes. So one of the things we see as something that could help improve that situation is getting legal literacy information out there in a much more accessible format for people, making sure that people are able to connect with self-advocacy groups and speaking up groups and groups like that in their community who are actively using their voices to talk about what's important to them. I think quite often people in the advocacy role don't get pulled in unless they're making noise about it. I'm actually doing some work with a young lady at the moment and acting as her independent advocate. And she has been going along to, mental health meetings with her CPN and many other health professionals, and not having a clue how to engage in the conversation where they're talking about planning her care pathway and her future support and things like that. And actually, it's only been because she's had me pushing and asking questions and challenging the decisions that are being made. And often that's the case for many people because they're not aware of their rights, and they're not aware that they can have somebody supporting them to speak up and to process information that's very complex often, and understand what their options are, so that they can make a clearly informed decision. And that's a big gap. That's something that's missing at the moment. And we see that as a thing that could help to make the citizen platform much stronger.
Mark, John Williams has a question too.
Yeah, well, it's just to sort of pick up on the circles confusion, because I understand your description of community circles. It's the one that's come across the waters from Beyond Welfare, and the Inclusive Solutions guys have been using a lot. And the circle of support you described is what I know as a circle, but Helen Sanderson and co have created something called community circles, which is essentially a circle of support approach, which I think is just confusing matters a little. So that's why I asked the question. So your description of a community circle is what I understand it to be. And we're a little community interest company called Flint Should Do It, and we set up because we're fed up of talk. So let's get on and do it. We co-produced a range of projects, and then we turned ourselves into a little cooperative, because that builds in that democracy. And I guess we use circles as a core approach around people. And I would argue that a really strong circle is a form of advocacy. When we're talking about advocacy here, it's an informal advocacy, and it can be really, really powerful, but it's often not recognised as that. And then we build projects that have all got an it on the end, but they're all essentially community circles. So we've got a coffee morning called Brew It, which brings people together. We've got a music making project called Rocket, a community cinema project called Watch It. And we've purposely taken off the siloed hats and brought people together around their strengths. So I feel like we're trying to do everything you're describing here, but we're just such a small fish. And getting the machine to play ball with us and work with us, it feels like they've got to come and work with us under the radar, like it's not allowed. It's really weird, you know. All the policies are saying thou must co-produce, focus on assets, etc. And yet the professionals are seemingly, it's not the thing that they must do. So that's a big barrier for us. I think we've got huge potential. We're applying most of the things you're doing here, but we're on the periphery. And it's how you bring people, organisations like ours, into the centre.
Yeah.
Well, I think Liz is going to respond, but Mark, I don't think you've joined Citizen Network, which would put you on a global map, and that would be one way. And share those stories through the centre's library we can do very easily, very happily. So there are ways we can amplify our own voice, and we can definitely help with.
Yeah, I've just signed up, Simon. So
very good.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Liz, did you want to come in?
Oh, I did, didn't I? Yeah, I was just going to say that what you've just explained, Mark, absolutely resonates with experiences that we've had as well, where we've actually had people who, social work practitioners, that have joined somebody's circle of support, and they've had to go through the disciplinary process for being on that person's circle of support. And that, as an experience for me, it just didn't make sense. Why is the very system that's here to support people sanctioning someone for doing something that's a natural support function within their community? That really jarred with me, and I couldn't rationalise that decision from the local authority in any way, shape or form. And I think this is a thing that we really need to, that tipping point that we were mentioning on the tensions, you know, this is where we are and this is where we want to be. It's elements like that really need to start to tip, so that people who have gone into this line of work for the right purposes are enabled to utilise the skills and the training for the best, rather than to prop up some agendas that have been created within statutory settings that don't serve a purpose other than for the statutory setting. Yeah, so it's a challenge.
Sarah, I don't know if you've had a chance to, I mean, Liz was asking, I think, in the privately, whether people will be happy for us to share the chat or to use the chat, which I think we'll be able to download. There's such a rich load of questions there, many of which you could use to build on some kind of helpful, maybe follow-up to the paper you're going to publish. But
I was just literally going to share what we were going to do with it, actually, Simon.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose I just draw attention, and maybe in the last few minutes, both of you might want to think about quite a lot of the themes, and you could pick out some of those things from the chat. Seem to be really kind of saying, really agree with this, but how? How do we get to the next level? So I know that that's a huge question, and the centre's work is all focused on this, but maybe you both want to think a little bit about at least some of your, as well as the immediate responses around the paper, some of the kind of strategies you think are most promising, or the things that you personally are going to put energy into as you're going forward over the next few months.
Sure. My first point would be, don't underestimate the power of stories. All of our work is based on telling stories, gathering stories, telling stories, sharing stories, and listening to other people's stories. And what we would encourage all of you who are on this call today to do in all of your individual settings and contexts and roles is to start gathering stories. Talk to the people that you're working with, ask them whether they would be willing to get their story gathered in some way. Would they be prepared to share it on camera? Would they be prepared to talk to you and have it written down? And start collecting. A lot of what our work involves is about proof of concept. And if you can tell stories and share examples and evidence of how doing things in a different way makes things better and often costs a lot less money as well, then that's how we can start to influence the people who make policy decisions. But also, so we talked about sharing stories. One of the key things we're doing, this presentation and the slides that you've seen today are graphics taken from the discussion paper we've written, and we've written in more detail really about some of the themes we've explored today on the webinar. When the paper is published, we will be sharing it far and wide on LinkedIn, on the Centre for Welfare Reform website, on the Imagineer website. Please go and have a look at our website if you haven't already. Well, Liz, could you put it in the chat bar actually so people can see the website? And we will be sharing the paper. Please share the paper with people who you think might be interested in having this conversation. That's the first point. Second point, we want this paper to be the start of a discussion. So what we're going to do is start breaking down some of the themes in this paper into smaller blog topics as well. And those blogs might be on video, some of them might be written blogs that are posted on social media that can be shared. But what we really want to do is start to stir a conversation. So we would really encourage you to keep looking out, follow us both on LinkedIn, check out our website, check out the Centre for Welfare Reform website. We will be posting this stuff regularly. We want to start the conversation. And the more people that join in with the conversation, the louder our voices get. Liz, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you've covered it all.
Okay.
I think one of the things that we mentioned, but excuse me if you've already said this, I was busy kind of typing the web address into the chat at one point, but we'd really like to do some follow-up webinars on the how. So to do some webinars on, like Mark, who mentioned earlier, around community circles of support, you know, just some background about how to develop them, what they mean. Also to do some webinars on mapping, asset mapping, community mapping, and how that can make a difference in people's local areas. So we would like to do some how webinars over a series as well to help with that. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to add really.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can, and I don't think there's any been calls out for any other questions. And as I say this, but there is a ton of really interesting points in the chat, which we will download. So we're just finishing like 2 minutes early, which is perfect. It's all good, isn't it? An extra time to go and brew a cup of tea. And thank you so much to everybody who's come. Yeah, stay in touch with all of us. We'll be maintaining a program of free webinars going forward. Have a little break in August, I think, but they'll start again. There'll be another one next week. In fact, it'll be me and Wendy Perez talking about the keys to citizenship next week.
Oh, brilliant. Good.
So
sign up for that one.
well, please do. And yeah, keep up the good fight. We've got plenty of plots aboil, trying to brew a revolution silently and gently. Liz, last point.
I've just picked up on the chat, Simon. Someone called Kevin, who we know via LinkedIn actually, he has asked if there's going to be somewhere where people can register their interest on follow-up conversations that we're planning to have. Would you have any suggestions of how people could do that if they do want to sign up?
I think the only way that comes to mind is when we put the webinar up, Liz, we can put a direct link to you or to Sarah or to some email address. I don't think we have any additional sign-up system we can easily create, but people can get in touch with you. And of course, because everything will be shared back via Citizen Network and the Centre, subscribing or joining will mean you'll stay attached. But I think that might be the best thing. So maybe when we post it all next week, just making sure that you provide a little bit of text and a link, and then people can immediately get in touch with you. That'd be acceptable?
That would work, wouldn't it?
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have lovely weekends. And hopefully see some of you again soon. Okay. Bye for now.